The road to Emmaus, Gospel of Luke chapter 24. There's these two disciples who are walking away from Jerusalem, the site of the crucifixion, and walking towards the village of Emmaus. And scholars say that Emmaus was basically a Roman garrison town. This is where the Roman army would camp out and refuel and this sort of thing. So it's symbolic. Physically, they're walking from here to there, but symbolically, they're walking towards a rival center of power. We're walking away from the site of suffering love and trying to find life through that particular dynamic and walking towards worldly power. So we're walking in the wrong direction. And Jesus appears in their midst. And what you hear is that they don't recognize him. And it's strongly implied the reason why they don't recognize Christ the Lord is because they're walking in the wrong direction. And so what does Jesus do? He walks them through the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, explaining all these things in light of himself, in light of the Paschal mystery, the suffering and death of Christ leading to his resurrection and glorification. And secondly, he has a meal with them, takes bread, blesses it, breaks it, gives it to them, and, as you might recall, they recognize him in the breaking of the bread. He disappears, but the change has taken place. They now have this impulse to go back to Jerusalem, the site of suffering love, and resume the mission of the church to make disciples of all nations, beginning with themselves. Now you're meant to see in this a certain parallel with the holy sacrifice of the Mass. So at the beginning of Mass, we all kind of begin in the same place. We're dissipated in our minds and our hearts because life is difficult and life is challenging. And so what does the Lord do? He walks us through the same dynamic that we find in the story of the road to Emmaus, right? So he walks us through the sacred scriptures, the first half of the Mass, the liturgy of the Word. And then he gives us himself in the second half of the Mass, the liturgy of the Eucharist. And then at the end, we're sent forth back into the world. But here's the thing. This renewal that we experience in the Mass is not possible if the Eucharist is simply a symbol. Again, life is difficult enough as it is. Life is difficult, life is challenging. Just think it through, right? So we experience the difficulties and challenges of life, we turn to the Lord, and the Lord responds by doing what? Giving us a symbol of his love, a symbol of his presence. That's just mean, right? This thing, this doctrine of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, it goes to the heart of Catholicism. What is Catholicism? It's not a contractual relationship, it's a covenantal relationship. It's not an exchange of goods and services, it's an exchange of persons. I give myself to you, whole and entire, you do the same thing. A covenantal relationship obtains. And that's what happens in the context of the Mass, right? Fortunately, the Lord gives us the very thing that we want, the very thing that we need, the very thing that our hearts pine for. Not goods, not services, not symbols, not metaphors, his very self. The body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ the Lord. That alone is what gives us strength and courage and power to change the direction of our hearts, to resume the path of suffering love.